I thought my life was pretty normal. I had a decent job, a cozy little house in the suburbs, and a marriage that, at least on the surface, seemed stable. I'm Jack, and my wife, Sarah, was the love of my life, or so I thought. We'd been married for 5 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I trusted her completely. She was smart, beautiful, and had this way of lighting up a room with her presence. But recently, something changed. At first, I chalked it up to stress at work. I'm a project manager and things can get hectic. Sarah had always been the one to pick me up when I was down, so I figured she was just having a rough time too. She started coming home late, claiming she was working overtime. I remember brushing it off at first, thinking, hey, everyone goes through phases. But then there were other signs. Little things, really, that didn't add up. Like the way she'd glance at her phone and quickly change the screen whenever I approached, or how she'd suddenly become obsessed with her appearance, spending more time than usual getting ready. I tried not to read too much into it, but my gut was telling me something was off. I should have listened to that nagging feeling. The breaking point came one Tuesday night. I had just finished a long day and was looking forward to a quiet evening. Sarah said she was meeting a coworker for drinks. It was an innocent enough excuse, but something in her voice made my skin crawl. That night, I decided to check her social media. I wasn't proud of it, but I felt a creeping paranoia. Scrolling through her Instagram, I found a picture that shattered my world. There she was, looking beautiful with a group of friends, one of whom was a guy I'd never seen before. They were too close for comfort, arms slung around one another, and there was something undeniably intimate about the way they were leaning into each other. My heart raced and my mind spiraled. I clicked on his profile and my worst fears were confirmed. His name was Ryan, a coworker Sarah had mentioned a few times. They'd been liking each other's posts for months, but I had never thought anything of it. The more I dug, the more I found. Messages, photos, and evidence that made it clear they were involved, and from the looks of it, it had been going on for longer than I'd like to believe. I sat there on the couch, staring at my phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out beneath me. Anger swelled inside me, mixing with disbelief and a heavy dose of betrayal. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something. But most of all, I wanted answers. I couldn't just sit quietly and let this fester. I waited for her to come home, packing the living room like a caged animal. When she finally walked in, carefree and cheerful, it made my blood boil. She smiled at me, and for that brief moment I felt sick. As she saw my expression, her smile faltered. "Jack, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern that felt all too insincere. "Do you want to explain this?" I said, throwing my phone onto the table, the image of her and Ryan glaring back at her like a spotlight. Her reaction was instant. The color drained from her face and she stammered, "I can explain, Jack. It's not what it looks like." I wasn't prepared for her excuses. She spun a web of lies, claiming it was all innocent, that Ryan was just a friend who was there for her during a tough time at work. I could feel my heart pounding, and the more she talked, the more furious I became. "Just a friend," I interrupted. "You've been lying to me, Sarah. This goes deeper than that. You know it." She tried to backtrack, her voice rising, getting defensive, and that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a simple misunderstanding. No, I was in the middle of a storm of betrayal. As I confronted her, I felt a mixture of shock and rage. I wanted her to see the damage she had done, not just to our marriage but to my heart. But trying to get through to her was like talking to a wall. The longer she talked, the more I felt the reality of my situation settling in. So there I was, standing in the living room, feeling like the ground had fallen out from under me while she spun her lies. The woman I had loved, who I thought I knew, was standing right in front of me, yet everything felt like a facade. This was the moment I had to decide how to move forward, but I was still too lost in the chaos to think clearly. All I felt was despair, anger, and betrayal. I didn't know what the next steps would be, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. I was going to make her pay for what she had done, and somehow I was going to reclaim my dignity. I had to think, but how? The night dragged on, and after that confrontation, I felt like I was stuck in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sarah kept trying to talk, to convince me that it was just a phase, that I was overreacting. But how could I? All I could see was betrayal, and I knew I needed to gather my thoughts before making any decisions. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, replaying the evening's events in my head. I thought about all our memories, the plans we had made, and the future I had envisioned with her. It all crumbled like a house of cards. I found myself waking up at the crack of dawn, still filled with anger and confusion. I couldn't just walk away from everything without a plan. My first thought was to gather more evidence. I knew if I was going to confront Sarah again, I needed to present irrefutable proof that her lies had no ground to stand on. I turned to the one resource I hadn't considered before, my own investigative skills. I started to retrace my steps, recalling conversations, behaviors, anything that stood out. I even checked her phone while she was in the shower. I felt like a private investigator, heart racing as I sifted through her messages, but I didn't find much more than what I'd already seen. Days turned into a blur as I followed her, trying to catch her in the act. It wasn't until Friday evening that I saw for myself just how deep this betrayal went. I had followed her to a bar after work, a place I had never heard her mention. Waiting outside, I felt my heart pounding in my chest, anticipation and dread swirling together. She walked in, and I could see her in the window, laughing and leaning in close to Ryan. They shared a drink, and it wasn't just a casual hangout, it was intimate. The kind of intimacy that crushed me from the inside out. Watching them, a wave of emotions hit me. It felt like I was drowning in disbelief and anger. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, evidence that would come in handy later. I wanted to confront her again, this time armed with more than just a hunch. When she finally came home that night, I was ready. I paced the living room, running through every possible scenario in my head. I wanted her to know that I had seen everything, that her lies were no longer going to work on me. When she walked through the door, she had that same happy expression on her face, but it quickly faded when she saw mine. "Jack, why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" she asked, a nervous quiver in her voice. "Oh, I did, Sarah," I replied, my voice low and steady. "I saw you with Ryan. You think I wouldn't find out?" Her face contorted in shock, as if the air had been knocked out of her. What are you talking about? Cut the crap. I saw you two together at the olive tree last night. You can't hide this from me anymore," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the pictures. The look on her face was priceless, a mix of disbelief and guilt. "Jack, I can explain," she stammered, but I wasn't in the mood for her excuses. "Explain what, Sarah? How you've been lying and cheating on me? What could you possibly say to make this okay? I'm done with your games," I snapped. She tried to backtrack, throwing out accusations that I was overreacting, that I was blowing things out of proportion. "It was just drinks. You know how he is. I thought you trusted me," she exclaimed, her voice rising as she grew increasingly defensive. Trust. I couldn't believe she even mentioned that word. Trust was shattered into a million pieces, and here she was trying to piece it back together with a flimsy excuse. The anger inside me boiled over, and I felt like I was losing control. "I don't want to hear that you thought I trusted you. You've betrayed me in the worst way," I yelled, feeling the weight of heartbreak and fury crashing down on me. In that moment, it became clear to me that I could no longer stand by her side. The emotional toll was too great, and her continued excuses only deepened the wound. I was ready to lay it all out on the table. "Sarah, I don't know if I can do this anymore. This isn't something we can just fix with a few I'm sorries. You've made your choice and you chose him. So now I have to make mine." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. I could see the realization dawning on her face, but there was something else there too: fear. She finally understood that I meant business. As the silence stretched between us, I could feel the weight of the moment crashing down. This was the reckoning, the moment that would change everything. I was exhausted from the lies, the deceit, and the emotional roller coaster she had put me on. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. There was no going back. I had to reclaim my dignity, even if it meant tearing apart the life we had built together. I was ready to take a stand, but I needed time to figure out how to execute my plan for revenge. I wanted her to feel the pain of betrayal the same way I had felt it. I was done being the victim. I was ready to become the architect of my own fate. But how would I do that? That was the next question I had to answer. After that night, a cloud of tension hung over our house. Sarah and I were essentially living as strangers under the same roof. The small talk was gone. All that was left was the heavy silence of unspoken words. I could sense her trying to play the victim, pouting and looking forlorn, but I was beyond the point of sympathy. I took time to gather my thoughts, but I also began to devise a plan to get back at her. I felt betrayed, angry, and most importantly, determined. I didn't just want to make her feel bad. I wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions. It was time to turn the tables. So I started with information. I reached out to a few mutual friends, people I knew Sarah had confided in. I casually mentioned that I was feeling a bit off about our marriage. The reactions I got were mixed. Some were sympathetic, others outright shocked, but it didn't matter to me. I was gathering my support team, and the whispers about Sarah's indiscretions began to spread. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on her. I logged her comings and goings, noting the times she left for work or errands. I wanted to catch her in the act again, not for closure but to solidify my resolve. I planned to confront Ryan directly, but I needed to make it dramatic, something she wouldn't forget easily. That weekend, I decided to call up my old college buddy, Mike. We hadn't hung out in ages, but I knew he was a good guy to have on my side. We went out for drinks, and I laid it all out for him. Mike was shocked at first, but quickly became invested in my plan for revenge. We brainstormed ways to make Sarah realize what she had lost without me directly confronting her. One idea that stuck was to throw a small party at our house. I could invite her friends and create a situation where she would have to face the uncomfortable reality of her actions. If she was going to step out on our marriage, then I would make her regret it. I worked on the details for a couple of days, making sure to keep it a secret from Sarah. I sent out invitations to our friends, carefully planting the idea of a surprise party for Sarah's promotion, with the theme being celebration of loyalty. I knew it would be a stretch, but I was banking on her falling for it. The night of the party arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I had set up everything perfectly: food, drinks, and music. I even arranged a little corner where people could give speeches. As guests began to filter in, I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. When Sarah walked in, her face lit up with genuine surprise. "Jack, what is all this?" she exclaimed, feigning delight. I could see her adrenaline rush. She thought she was in for a fun night, the last thing on her mind being the consequences of her actions. "Just a little celebration for you, babe," I said, forcing a smile. My heart raced as I watched her mingle with our friends, enjoying the attention, but I was waiting for the right moment to drop the bomb. As the night progressed, I pulled Mike aside. "It's time," I said, and he nodded knowingly. I grabbed the microphone and called everyone's attention. "Hey everyone, can I have your attention, please?" The music quieted and people turned their heads toward me, curious. "First off, I just want to say how grateful I am for all of you being here tonight. It means a lot to both Sarah and me. However, tonight isn't just about her promotion. It's also about something else: the importance of loyalty in relationships." I paused, watching Sarah's expression shift from joy to confusion. "Sarah, I know how hard you've been working lately, and I wanted to make this night special for you. But I think it's also time we had a little conversation about trust." I turned to Mike, who stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I think it's important for everyone here to know about some recent developments in our lives." With that, he played a video on a projector I had set up, showing the evidence I had gathered over the past couple of weeks: pictures of Sarah with Ryan, laughing and looking way too comfortable. I could already hear gasps from the crowd. Sarah's face turned pale and her eyes widened in disbelief. "What the hell, Jack?" she yelled, her voice trembling with anger. "Surprise! I hope you all enjoy this celebration of loyalty," I said, trying to keep my composure while the crowd began to murmur among themselves. The room erupted into chaos. Friends looked between Sarah and me, trying to process what was happening. Some people shifted uncomfortably, while others looked downright shocked. I could feel the tension boiling over. The party I had orchestrated had turned into an emotional explosion. Sarah tried to shout over everyone, "This isn't what you think it is. You're making a huge mistake." But I didn't let her continue. "No, Sarah, you made the mistake. You chose to betray me." and I'm just making sure everyone here knows the truth." I watched as her world crumbled in real time. Friends who she thought would have her back were now looking at her with judgment in their eyes. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction mixed with sadness. I had exposed her, but I also realized that our friends were now tangled in this mess too. After the initial shock wore off, some guests quietly slipped away, unable to handle the tension. Mike and a few others stayed to support me, but I could see that not everyone knew how to handle the fallout. As Sarah stood there, eyes filled with tears and rage, I felt a flicker of pity. Maybe she didn't expect the ripple effect of her actions to come crashing down on her like this. Still, I couldn't let myself feel too sorry for her. She had brought this on herself, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. "Jack, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You don't understand." I shook my head, feeling the weight of my decision settle on my shoulders. "No, Sarah, I do understand. You made your choice, and now we all have to live with it." The party, which had begun as a celebration, had turned into a public display of betrayal. I knew things would never be the same again. As I watched her crumble in front of our friends, I felt a sense of finality. This was the end of our marriage, and I was finally ready to move on. The aftermath of that night was a whirlwind. The next day, I woke up to an empty house, the silence deafening. I had pushed my wife into the spotlight, exposing her betrayal for everyone to see. I could still hear the echoes of her protests, the way she tried to explain herself amidst the chaos. But nothing she said had changed the reality. She had cheated, and now the world knew. As the sun poured through the windows, I felt a strange mix of liberation and emptiness wash over me. I had taken a stand, but the victory felt hollow. I realized I had not only shattered Sarah's world but my own in the process. The weight of what I had done hung heavy on my shoulders. I had orchestrated this spectacle, but I hadn't fully grasped how deeply it would affect me. I spent the day in a daze, reeling from the events of the previous night. Calls and messages poured in from friends, some expressing sympathy, others just shocked. They were trying to process what had happened, and I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I hadn't meant to drag them into this mess, but I also knew I needed support. As the day wore on, I finally heard from Sarah. She texted me, her message terse and filled with anger. "You have no idea what you've done. You're a monster." I felt a mix of anger and resentment when I read that. How could she even think to call me a monster? She was the one who had betrayed our vows. My phone buzzed again. It was Mike, checking in on me. "Hey man, you good? That was a lot last night." I appreciated his concern, so I replied, just trying to wrap my head around everything. "I never thought it would come to this. Honestly, you did what you had to do. If she was going to cheat, she deserves to face the consequences. Don't let her make you feel guilty about it," he texted back. He was right. I needed to stay strong. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the real emotional toll was yet to come. The anger I had felt initially had now morphed into profound sadness. I thought about the dreams we had shared, the future we had planned. It felt like watching a movie where the ending had been rewritten without warning. By the evening, I decided I needed to confront Sarah again, this time to lay everything on the table. I wanted answers, not just excuses. I had to understand how she could throw away everything we had built together. The confrontation felt inevitable, and I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. When I arrived home, Sarah was already there, sitting on the couch, her eyes puffy from crying. She didn't look like the confident woman I had married. She looked defeated and broken. The sight stirred something in me. Was it sympathy? Or was it just the remnants of our life together pulling at my heartstrings? "Sarah," I began, taking a deep breath. "I need to know why. Why did you do this?" She looked up at me, her expression a mixture of anger and pain. "You don't get it, Jack. You were so wrapped up in your work that you didn't even see me anymore. I felt alone. Ryan was there for me when you were." Her words stung, and I felt a surge of denial. "But that doesn't justify cheating. You could have talked to me. We could have worked on it together." "Talk? You were too busy with your job, your projects." I felt abandoned. She retorted, the fire in her voice reigniting her anger. "Really? You think I wanted to neglect you? I was trying to build a future for us, Sarah. I thought you understood that. I thought you would understand that I needed you," she shot back, her defenses rising. It was frustrating. Every time I tried to engage in a real conversation, she would shift the blame back to me. It was as if she was unwilling to take any responsibility for her actions. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. But you chose to betray me instead of communicating. You made that choice. You could have told me you were unhappy, that you needed more from me instead of running off with another man. I said, my voice steady but filled with pain. She fell silent, her eyes downcast. I could see a hint of regret, but I also sensed a refusal to accept full accountability. I thought I could keep it from you. I didn't want to hurt you, she finally murmured, almost to herself. Do you think this didn't hurt me? Do you think dragging me into this public humiliation didn't hurt? I shot back, the anger bubbling beneath the surface again. As the conversation progressed, it became clear that Sarah was still living in denial. I wanted to make her see the gravity of her actions, but all I got was an angry woman who refused to admit she had made a terrible mistake. I thought you loved me, I shouted, feeling the heartbreak slicing through me. I do love you, Jack, but I also loved the attention Ryan gave me. I needed to feel wanted again. She cried, her voice trembling. I shook my head in disbelief. You threw everything away for a temporary thrill. You betrayed our vows, Sarah. The truth of it all hit me like a wave. I felt lost. We went back and forth, neither of us willing to back down. I was trying to make sense of her actions while she was trying to justify the unthinkable. It was a toxic cycle, and I could feel the emotional weight dragging me down. In the end, I realized this conversation wouldn't lead to any reconciliation. I needed to move on, but I still had unanswered questions gnawing at me. How had we gotten here? What had gone so wrong in our relationship that she felt she had to cheat? As the evening wore on, I finally made the decision. I would file for divorce. I didn't want to get caught in this vicious cycle of blame and regret. I wanted to reclaim my life, and to do that I had to sever all ties. It was time to let go of the past and start anew. I looked at Sarah one last time, feeling a surge of sadness but resolution as well. I think it's time we go our separate ways, I said, my voice steady. Her face fell, and I could see the realization hit her like a freight train. You can't be serious, she whispered, her voice breaking. I am serious. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. And with that, I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of my decision settle heavily on my shoulders. But I also felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I was finally ready to face my future, whatever it might hold. The decision to file for divorce was both liberating and terrifying. I spent the next few days in a fog, navigating my emotions and figuring out the logistics of separating my life from Sarah's. The house we had shared felt increasingly foreign, filled with memories that now felt like shadows of a life that was slipping away. I hired a lawyer, which was an intimidating process. Sitting in that small office, I felt a mix of vulnerability and determination. My lawyer, Lisa, was sharp and direct. She laid out the steps I needed to take and asked about our assets and debts. It was surreal to talk about dividing our lives in a legal context, but I was resolute. I knew I had to protect myself and ensure that the fallout from Sarah's betrayal didn't ruin my life completely. As I began the process, I also reached out to friends for support. I didn't want to keep this bottled up. I needed to surround myself with people who could help me through this. Mike was my anchor, always encouraging me and reminding me that I was doing the right thing. He even offered to help me pack up some of Sarah's things while I prepared for the next steps. The first major hurdle came when I had to confront Sarah again to let her know about my decision to file. I was nervous as I drove home, rehearsing what I would say in my head. I knew this wouldn't be an easy conversation, but I had to be firm. I realized that if I didn't stand my ground now, I might find myself allowing her to manipulate the situation once more. When I walked through the door, she was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. It had been a few days since the party, and I could see that she was still processing the fallout of her actions. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Jack, can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than I had expected. "Yeah, we need to talk," I replied, my tone steady. I sat across from her, my heart racing as I gathered my thoughts. "I've made my decision, Sarah. I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air like a lead weight. I watched her face fall, hurt flashing in her eyes. "You can't be serious. We can work through this. We've always figured things out before." "No, we can't," I responded firmly, feeling the weight of my own resolve. "You made your choice when you cheated. I can't stay in a marriage built on lies. I refuse to be in a relationship where I can't trust my partner." She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand to stop her. "You've had your chances. You've had multiple opportunities to be honest with me to try to fix this, and you chose to lie and betray me instead." "Jack, please, I'm sorry, I messed up. Can't we try to rebuild?" she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I felt a pang of sadness at her tears, but I shook my head. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for getting caught. This isn't about rebuilding. It's about facing the consequences of your actions. I need to move on." Her face crumpled, and I could see the realization wash over her. "What about everything we built together? Don't you care about that?" "I cared about it enough to fight for it, but I can't fight for something that you destroyed. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine." The conversation ended with her in tears and me feeling more resolute than ever. I felt the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders as I made the decision to move forward with my life, even if it meant letting go of the person I once loved deeply. The weeks that followed were a blur. I focused on work, threw myself into my projects, and spent more time with friends who supported me. Mike was my confidant during this time, often reminding me that I was doing what was best for myself. I even started to think about the future, tentatively exploring new hobbies, reconnecting with old friends, and focusing on self-care. But the emotional toll of the divorce still lingered. It became harder to ignore the painful memories that flooded my mind at times, especially when I saw couples together or came across our old photographs. I found myself reflecting on the good times we had shared, the vacations, the laughter, and the dreams we built together. Still, I knew I had to keep reminding myself of the reasons I had chosen this path. One day, as I sorted through old belongings, I stumbled across a box filled with our wedding memorabilia, the invitations, photos, and other trinkets from that special day. My heart sank as I remembered the joy I had felt, but instead of staying lost in nostalgia, I made a choice. I took the box outside and lit a small fire in the backyard, watching as the flames consumed the remnants of our past life together. Seeing the smoke rising into the air felt cathartic. It was a symbolic act of letting go, of moving forward. I could finally feel the shackles loosening, and it dawned on me that I had the power to reclaim my life. I knew the final step in this process was to file the divorce papers officially. I called my lawyer, and she told me it was time to move forward. That afternoon, I arrived at the courthouse, my hands shaking slightly with anticipation. But I felt a sense of peace wash over me as I signed the documents, knowing this was the beginning of my new chapter. As I walked out of the courthouse, I looked up at the sky, feeling the sun warm my face. It was a small step, but I felt empowered. I was finally taking control of my life, leaving the past behind and embracing whatever the future held. Reflecting on everything, I knew that this experience would shape me, but it wouldn't define me. I had learned some hard lessons about trust, love, and self-respect. I wanted to be someone who could stand tall and proud, even after being knocked down. This journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my identity and finding strength in vulnerability. It was time to focus on healing and looking forward, and I was ready to embrace whatever new adventures awaited me. The weeks turned into months, and as I navigated my new reality, I found myself slowly healing. The divorce was finalized, and while the paperwork had been a burden, I felt lighter once it was done. I had disconnected from the emotional turmoil that had consumed me for so long. While I wouldn't say I was fully over what had happened, I was beginning to accept it. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my relationship with Sarah. It was strange to think about the love I had felt, the dreams we had built together, and how suddenly everything had come crashing down. I realized that it wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was the loss of the life I thought we would have. But with that realization came the understanding that I could create a new life for myself, one that didn't include the shadows of the past. I also began to explore what I wanted for my future. I rekindled old hobbies that Sarah had never been interested in. I started taking dance classes, something I had always wanted to do but had put off for years. It felt liberating to step outside of my comfort zone, and surprisingly, I found joy in movement. I made new friends, people who shared the same interests and passions. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of community and support that had been missing from my life. One evening at a local dance studio, I met someone new, Emily. She was vibrant and full of life, and I felt an instant connection. We started talking, sharing stories of our lives, and I was struck by how easy it was to communicate with her. She had a warmth about her that made me feel safe, and we quickly agreed to grab coffee after class. As we spent more time together, I realized that Emily had a similar story. She had come out of a long-term relationship that had ended painfully, and we bonded over our shared experiences of heartache and betrayal. She wasn't looking for anything serious, just someone to enjoy life with, and that appealed to me. With Emily, I felt free to be myself without the weight of my past dragging me down. We laughed, went on spontaneous outings, and shared our dreams for the future. I found myself smiling more than I had in years, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt hopeful. One afternoon, while we were hiking a local trail, I paused to look at the view. The beauty of the landscape reminded me of how far I had come. You know, I said to Emily, I never thought I'd be here again, feeling this way after everything that happened. She smiled softly, her eyes sparkling. Sometimes, the hardest experiences lead us to the best things in life, and it sounds like you're on that path. Her words resonated deeply with me. I was beginning to understand that while the pain from my marriage would always be a part of my story, it didn't have to define me. I had the power to shape my destiny, to embrace new beginnings, and to learn from my past rather than be haunted by it. As I continued to explore my relationship with Emily, I became more comfortable with the idea of love again. I learned to communicate better, honoring my own feelings while also being attentive to hers. It was refreshing to build a connection based on mutual respect and understanding, something I had missed in my marriage with Sarah. I also made a point to reflect on my own needs and boundaries. I wanted to be a better partner, not just for her but for myself. I sought therapy, not because I thought I was broken, but because I wanted to ensure I was emotionally equipped to navigate this new chapter. I wanted to learn from my mistakes, to grow, and to ensure I entered into anything new with clarity and intention. As Emily and I grew closer, I found myself smiling more, laughing more, and genuinely enjoying life again. I had learned valuable lessons about trust and the importance of communication, both in love and in friendship. It felt good to be in a place where I could embrace vulnerability without fear, to let someone in without the shadows of my past holding me back. The journey had changed me in ways I had never expected. The pain had been a catalyst for growth. I realized that relationships could be rebuilt, but they needed to be built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. I was ready for whatever came next, whether it was with Emily or on my own. Looking back on everything, I felt grateful for the experience, even if it had been painful. It had taught me resilience, strength, and the importance of self-worth. I was now standing on the other side of heartache, ready to embrace the future. With open arms, in those quiet moments I could finally say I was okay. I had learned to love myself again, and that was the most important lesson of all. I was no longer just Jack, the man whose world had been shattered. I was Jack, a man ready to write the next chapter of his life, one filled with hope, adventure, and the promise of new beginnings.